Welcome to Moving Conversations, a podcast for movement professionals by movement professionals. If you coach, train, or teach movement, Pilates, or fitness, then this podcast is for you. With more than 60 years of experience in fitness and Pilates, your hosts, Brian Ritchie and Nora St. John, explore the science of human movement, diving deep into the facts, myths, and common misconceptions, hoping to spark thought and conversation about how we view fitness and movement. Now, let's jump into Moving Conversations. And welcome back to Moving Conversations. I'm Brian Ritchie. Joining me as always is Nora St. John. Good morning, Nora. How are you doing?
Pretty well, Brian. It's another foggy day here in Sacramento. It's like I'm sorry, I'm a Californian. Those of you who are not, I apologize. But we expect sunshine. We anticipate sunshine. And it has been foggy or rainy. Like there's been like no more than an hour of sunlight, like once a week for the last month. It's a little nuts.
Okay, looking behind the curtain here. Today we're recording, it's the 2nd of January. Yesterday, being January 1st, turn on the Rose Bowl parade. It is pouring like you wouldn't believe. And I'm watching this feeling so sorry. And I felt bad for all the commentators because you knew that they were like, we're going from the East Coast. We're going to fly out to California, sunny California. We're going to get a break from the weather. And here's this cold rain that they're sitting in.
No.
And I felt so bad for them. But I mean, California kind of needs the rain. So, can't complain too much, but I'm sure it's been just so miserable when you're used to having so much sun to have so much drizzle and rain and nastiness.
I'm like, I didn't move to Cleveland for a reason, people. Because I've been to Cleveland in the winter. I've been to like Denver in the winter. It's gray and gray and gray and gray. It's like, oh, come on. Anyway, how are you doing?
Doing all right. Yeah. It's been chilly. It's been cold. It's been really cold. It's supposed to warm up a little next week, but this week it's been very cold. I went outside this morning to start the truck and it was 23 degrees. So it was a little chilly. Yeah. So little Hawaii boy doesn't do well with that, but that's okay. It is what it is. It'll warm up eventually. My wife actually came in and said, look outside. It was 5 minutes after 5. And I said, yeah. And she goes, it's not completely dark anymore. It's starting to get light. I said, okay, you're really pushing it. I said, we just hit the solstice. She said, yes, but it's heading in the right direction. I said,
it's happening.
I see the light. I was like, okay, I'm glad you do. But it'll warm up. It always does. Well, with a new year upon us, we've had a couple of episodes where we talked about the new year, something that always seems to come up for clients. I don't know if you see this, but in my practice, we see this a lot this time of year. People start coming in, they go to the gym for, the first couple of weeks and they get surprised with things like low back pain or shoulder pain, knee pain, things that they haven't exercised in a while. They're now trying to completely out-exercise the holidays in 3 days. And well, that doesn't work.
A month of indulgence does not go away in the first week at the gym, right?
Exactly. So we thought, let's revisit. Let's go into a deeper dive. It seems like every time we do a deeper dive, we go a little deeper and a little deeper. So we're going to talk a little bit about stenosis today and go into a little case studies, what you can do exercise-wise and things like that, because stenosis is definitely one of those that we hear a lot in my practice, at least. It comes up a lot that it's one of those age-related issues that seems to sort of creep in there. I'm having, clients who just turned 50 say, yeah, stenosis, it ran in the family and, I'm starting to have low back pain. And I think it's happening at that young an age. I'm thinking, okay, well, I'm not 100% sure of that. Why don't you have your doctor, at least get a baseline at a young age, which is a great thing to do. But it is also something to start watching and, maybe strengthening around at a younger age just to make sure that it doesn't necessarily, incapacitate down later in life.
So starting with just what stenosis is, for those of you who aren't aware. So stenosis just means narrowing. And it typically relates to, in this pathological context, in narrowing in the various spinal canals. It can be the central canal, or the spinal cord just goes through the middle of the vertebra, or it can be kind of the transverse foramen where the nerves come out. And if those spaces narrow, they put pressure on nerves. That's usually the symptom, right? If they're just narrow and they're not touching anything, nobody knows it necessarily. But if it's narrowing and it's starting to put some pressure on some nerves, you get a lot of different kinds of nerve symptoms, weakness, pain, local and distal. So all kinds of stuff happens.
Yeah. Just think of a garden hose. It's supposed to run at a certain rate. And if you start squeezing at multiple places, you're going to get less. You're going to get less of that water coming through. Well, we need a certain amount of nerve action and interaction in order for our body to do what it wants, what it should do, for proprioception, for the way, everything feels, to motor control. Everything is related to the nervous system in some way, shape, or form in how we move. So when we have those issues, you may have that numbness, tingling, radiating pain. If it gets bad enough, it can actually begin to affect motor skills. So I literally have a new client who has stenosis, and he was saying, yeah, his one side he had sort of taken care of, and the reason that they had it done was he was starting to develop drop foot. So it was affecting his motor skills. And that's when it's like, look, you have no choice now. We need to get this sort of taken care of. So when there is that narrowing, whether it be in the intervertebral foramen where the nerves come out of the central canal in that area, or whether it's in the central canal squeezing off on the spinal cord, sometimes you have to do what you have to do to relieve that pressure to get those nerves to work right.
And so one of the things that I want to bring up here is, so stenosis has nerve symptoms, but honestly, they're quite different in my experience from disc herniations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And I think that's important to bring up because, we talk a lot about back pain on this podcast for sure. But, disc injuries, in my experience, tend to be more one-sided, more episodic, if you will. When people with stenosis, I find that the nerve symptoms are often more commonly bilateral, not always, but more commonly so, and seem to be very pressure related. So, somebody walks for a long time, somebody stands or sits for a long time, and just that compression of the spine seems to increase the symptoms. So it just feels like it's a different presentation than a disc issue.
Episodic is the best way to put that, especially for a disc issue. And we'll cover herniations in a couple of weeks. But herniations do sort of come and go. And it just matters if that disc is touching the nerve or not.
At that moment.
And if it is at that moment. Yeah. And you can sometimes get around it by just shifting or moving slightly, and it takes pressure off of it. And then it's like, oh, it went away. Whereas with stenosis, it happens for a length of time, and it's usually always there in some way, shape, or form to a small amount. You'll feel it a little bit. You sometimes can get away from it by moving your body in a certain way, but it's much more. It starts gradually and then gets more and more and more in the intensity and the way it feels. And something to think about, though, when you said, right, if it's one-sided or both-sided, we have to remind ourselves there's lateral stenosis, which affects where the nerves come out, and there's central stenosis, which affects the central canal, which will affect the spinal canal. Now, for our older clients, you're absolutely right. It's almost always that central stenosis where it's actually squeezing off on the spinal cord. And when that happens, it usually does affect both sides. And that's usually the older client who, if they stand too long a period of time, that compression, the arching of the back or whatnot starts squeezing down on that area, and it becomes a relentless numbness and achiness down their legs. And the only thing usually that can help is by sitting down, is by taking pressure off of the area and going into more of a flexed posture. Whereas lateral stenosis, if I have a couple clients with that, it usually happens a little younger. I see it a little younger than my older clients with the central stenosis. And for that, it usually will only happen to one side. But you can have bilateral lateral stenosis, which can make this even more confusing. But oftentimes the lateral stenosis is more one-sided, and the only way you're really going to know that is through an MRI or an X-ray or something that actually can go in there and actually see what's being occluded and how it's being squeezed off.
So thinking about that, think about stenosis. So what we're trying to do from a movement perspective, from a neuromyofascial perspective, is decrease compression of the spine,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're trying to
Yeah.
create axial elongation, decompression, creating more space, trying to use the muscles as best we can and positioning to create more space between the vertebrae so that, again, that narrowing isn't pinching on the nerves, gets a little more space so that that nerve can move freely or not be impinged. And that's kind of the key thing with a lot of things that we do with the spine, but particularly with stenosis, is how do we create more space, more axial elongation, more decompression.
Yeah. And that's very, very important. Positioning, as we've talked about in the past with almost all spinal things, you want to find the position that's not going to bother the person. And in general, with stenosis, finding that right position is often going to be more of a flat back position, often going to be more of a flexed posture, not always, but often more. And I will say this, central stenosis versus lateral stenosis. Central stenosis in general, from what this is my experience and everything that I've read, they really need to be in much greater flexion of the spine than lateral stenosis does. That for them, taking pressure off of it really does require that forward flexion, does require almost a flat back position when they are in supine. Whereas in lateral stenosis, a lot of times just flattening their back a little bit can often take that pressure off and open up that intervertebral foramen just enough that they're like, oh, I don't feel it anymore. So you really want to find out from them where is the right position by asking them, how does it feel? Do you still feel it here? And really become more of a body detective and really try and figure out what's going to work right for you, that client in front of you.
And like with any positional training, especially for low back stuff, I think about stenosis a little bit differently than I think about disc issues or other kinds of low back pain, in the sense that oftentimes my clients with stenosis doesn't resolve on its own, put it that way. Disc issues can often resolve on their own. They shrink, the pressure, the discs pull away from the nerves, whatever. Things happen where oftentimes disc issues have a lifespan and they have kind of a, beginning and an end, or at least a moderation. Stenosis, not so much, at least in terms of the pathology itself. You can certainly do things to moderate the effects of it, but it doesn't really get better on its own. So because of that, once you've found the position, you often then have to train the client on how to kind of maintain that position in their daily life, which can get a little bit interesting. Because it's not a usual posture. It's a weird posture that may be what brings them pain relief.
Yeah. And if you think about it, I love how you put that. With a disc herniation, it's a lot like a bell curve, where we see a beginning, it gets worse. There's a peaking where things are pretty intense. And a lot of times things will gradually begin to recess. The disc will actually begin to reabsorb sometimes, not always, but it can reabsorb at least a little bit to pull pressure off of that nerve. And then they may not feel it for a while. It may come back, it may go away, but it looks a little bit more like a bell curve where there's a beginning stage. And then at the end, a little bit of a lightening up. And that's when you find the right position. Hopefully it starts to recede, and that can happen. But what I find with stenosis is it's much more of a linear graph that goes upward at an angle. And it starts off very small, but over time, depending on the person, because sometimes it is arthritis based and some people are more prone to arthritis than others are. And if they are, sometimes they may develop a little bit more, the bones may grow a little bit more of that bone spurring or arthritis that can cause this effect. And that can definitely lead to that, where, again, if you just have one or two bone spurs, that's all you kind of need to touch on the spinal cord to begin to have some of these symptoms. And oftentimes I find as they get a little older, it seems to keep increasing over time. And, rarely have I seen it just manifest itself, like you said, as, oh, I woke up and it's gone today, and never bothered them again.
I've never seen that. No, I've seen it. It's sort of like it's a wave. It'll get a little better, a little worse, a little better, a little worse. But its general pattern is not to really go away. I mean, a lot of people with disc injuries, it'll go away, or it'll become, something that they only get occasionally when they're in a certain position for a period of time. And with stenosis, I don't find that so true.
What's interesting is when you said, when we were talking about position, I have a gentleman came to me 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, a challenge to say the least. One of the problems is stenosis. He has some central stenosis. He had some lateral that was taken care of on one side, and that was taken care of. That's the gentleman with the drop foot. He still has a little bit of that, but it's not too bad. But every time he stands up from any seated position, the first thing he does is thinks about, I guess, correcting posture. So what does he do? His hands go on his low back and he arches his back and he lifts his chest. The exact wrong thing you want to do in this situation.
Right. That is not going to help that stenosis. Right. So just to be clear here, right. So Brian keeps saying this, that if you think about how the spine works, right. If I go into extension, I shrink the space that those nerves are coming out of, both centrally and laterally. So that's why like extension, not so good in that circumstance. It's like, oh, I'm just going to put a little more pressure on that nerve.
Exactly. And that's the whole thing. He'll do that. And I say, and I mentioned it. He ignored me. I mentioned it. He ignored me. Finally, I said, did that feel good when you just did that? He goes, no, not really. I said, then why do you keep doing it? And he just went, oh, I don't know. I said, look, it's a habit, but I'm going to tell you this. It's a very bad habit. And so I literally had to teach him how to do a small pelvic tilt in a standing position.
Right. Exactly.
So for him, it was, okay, I want you just to stand up. Now, instead of arching your back, all I want you to do is soften your tailbone and tuck under a little bit. Now, any of you who have worked with an older gentleman know that their pelvis is pretty much solid as a rock. That thing does not shift. It's pretty much stuck oftentimes. So it took a little while for him. I literally had to put my hands on his hip bones and get him to feel what it felt like. But I got him into, and I said, it just needs a slight posterior tilt. And when he did that, I said, no, just stand there for 30 seconds. He did. And he goes, oh, it's not as bad. That tingling, it sort of went away. That sciatic pain seemed to recede. I said, exactly. And by getting him to feel that, it's sort of like, okay, I want to give him a positive experience with that motion so that he will realize, oh, I do this, I get that.
Yes, exactly.
So for him, I could do everything I wanted to in a supine position. I could get him in the right position and get all that. But I really had to train him in a standing position for the light to go off in his head of, oh, here's what I need. And I still caught him doing it the next few sessions, but he did it less. And he said, yeah, I think if I remember to just tuck under a little bit, it really helps. So again, it was hard, but he was able to get that, eventually.
Which is what we do, right? Ideally, if we can actually help them to figure out what feels better, guide them to it. And it sounded like this guy was, well, we've had a conversation before this about some of the challenges of this particular gentleman, just a little bit reluctant to change patterns, which many of us are, right? And many of us have ideas about what we think is the right thing to do. In his case, it's like, oh, I need to be in proper posture. Well, in this case, proper posture is actually kind of, tucked under. It's not the traditional normal posture. The other thing too is with stenosis, the things that are particularly challenging are standing and walking because they're upright. And just being upright in gravity, we tend to go into more lordosis, right? Sitting, most people slump and they're a little more flexed. And supine people can choose their back position, but standing up is always where it's like that back from most people wants to be a little more extended. And that's usually where the pain comes in, is in standing and walking. Yeah.
That's one of the contraindications a lot of times for central stenosis is prolonged standing or anything overhead, even lifting the arms in front of the body, above the shoulder height, puts you into a natural extension, especially if they're an older individual. Their shoulders are usually going to be a little tighter. So as they lift their arms up, their spine will actually begin to arch back before their shoulders will flex anymore. And we see that. We see that when people are reaching up overhead, reaching into a cupboard or something like that. So that's something that we have to re-educate, to try and get them into reminding them just to tuck under just a little bit. And a lot of times, the other thing to think about is softening the knees. Because as soon as people lock their knees, they tend to go into a lordosis as well. So just by softening the knees a little bit, opens that space up. And again, for some people, it's only a minute amount that needs to happen before they feel some relief. Yes, some people are going to walk around like Mr. Magoo with their, belt hiked up under their chest, and they're going to look really tucked under. But those are severe cases. For some people, it just requires a little bit of opening up of where it's narrowing, and it really provides quite a bit of relief.
And then the second thing is so that's just positional work and pain relief, which is critical. Then the second thing is, how do you support that, right? How do you support that position muscularly, habit wise? And then also, how do you use, like we always talk about with engaging the core, to decompress the lumbar spine, activating the transversus and the multifidi and the pelvic floor and the diaphragm, just to have that sense of elongation and that sense of decompression. That's like, sort of the second piece, if you will. First is pain relief, get them to trust you. And then the next piece is really, how do you work that core for elongation, not for compression?
Yeah. And a lot of times when you're working with a client like this, that beginning part is probably the most important, just getting them to trust and for them to feel like there is some hope that,
Right.
If I do this, if I'm in this position, it really doesn't feel that bad. Okay. So now that I can get them into a relative pain-free range of motion, hopefully, or at least a decreased amount of discomfort, then we can begin strengthening. And you're right, by getting them to focus on the transverse abdominis, getting them to feel what it feels like to activate their core using their breath, getting axial elongation in the supine position to start with, and really getting that to feel that. Okay, and then beginning to transition them from that position into other positions it really can be a lifesaver for some of these people. And then literally just trying to find what position works for them in seated, in standing, because guess what? Maybe they need to slump a little bit. Maybe they need their feet out in front of them a little bit more. Maybe you're going to have to play with it a little bit to see what position works best for this client.
Right. Right. And then in terms of like you're training the core for elongation for that particular client, I've played a lot of things like that. Like one of them is really just putting my hand on the top of their head. Let's say they're seated, and I say, okay, just get taller, like just get a little bit taller. And some of that is just core, because if you really engage the core, you'll get a little bit taller. Some of it is also how much and how do you engage the glutes? Right, because the glutes are also kind of part of that, and part of that support for the low back. And glutes are really, I think we've talked about this in one of our podcasts, but for some people overuse them, and some people underuse them. And sometimes finding that balance of how much they can help to support that elongation and that low back position is a thing. But if you're thinking about a slight posterior tilt, right, that can happen from the abdominals, right? Really pulling the abdominals in and pushing that back. It can also happen from the glutes, and a combination of the two, like a little posterior tilt, a little pelvic tilt. And how clients learn to do that can often also influence how they feel with stenosis.
No question. The problem with the glutes, I find a lot of times, is anytime you try and get them into getting their glutes engaged in a neutral position, meaning their body is pretty straight, they almost always will arch their back. They go into extension. And for us, it's really important for them to realize that their core can be engaged. They can still keep axial elongation with getting their glutes involved, with getting it to fire, and even getting some hip extension without really dumping into back extension at the same time. And sometimes that's really where we want to focus on, is really trying to get them to separate the two. And really
that's tricky.
That's tricky as heck.
That is, I've worked with a lot of clients with that, like that idea of my low back and my legs aren't completely connected. Like I can work them independently. That's novel. That's very novel.
100%. And that's something that I work on pretty much right from the get-go with a lot of people.
Yeah.
One of my favorite exercises is if they can be prone, getting them in a prone position, hands under the hip bone, so they can push their pelvis into their hands so they can feel their pelvis. Because their pelvis, as soon as they go into extension, will want to rock one side forward and the other side backwards. But if they are really getting gluteal engagement, and they can get their core engaged and only begin to initiate lifting one leg, into hip extension. Believe it or not, I've gotten a lot of people to be able to say, wow, I'm really feeling my glutes. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Yes.
And not to get into the low back. And for some people, you're going to get hip flexor tightness, and that's an issue to work on. There's going to be a lot of, I hate to say this, chasing the symptom, because it could be, is it hip flexor? Is it gluteal weakness? Is it just natural recruitment of the lumbar spine that's their go-to? And you have to re-educate that. So some of this is really about chasing different things to get them to be able to do it. But it's a great piece of homework, I find, for clients, because with their hands under their hips, it gives them the feedback. They're not relying on me to tell them when they're doing it right. They can feel it. If they're pushing in with both and they lift their legs and I can still feel equal pressure with both hands, oh my gosh, I'm doing it right. And then I say, do you feel your glutes? Yeah. Do you feel your low back? No. All right, we're on to something. It's like, anchor this feeling and let's do it again. Let's do it again and keep, lather, rinse, repeat. Keep doing it until they really get it and can do it at home on their own, because it's something just to remind those glutes how to fire, how to get engaged again. But it can be a trick. It's really a challenge.
And I have to say, with my clients where extension is an issue, like just a modification, maybe you mentioned this, but I'll often have them, let's say, leaning over, like in the Pilates environment, the trap table or a reformer box, so that they start at hip flexion of some kind, and then they can feel their hands. They can put their hands easily underneath their hips, and then maybe they can't lift their leg to neutral. For a lot of clients, if they try to go to even start from neutral and go up, they just can't. They don't have the range. They will just go into the low back no matter what. So starting from below neutral, and then going up as far as they can comfortably maintain that balanced pelvis and that engaged core and that appropriate amount of gluteal engagement is awesome. Right? That's a really fantastic exercise.
Love doing it there. Also over a ball.
Yeah.
If they feel comfortable on that is another way. But again, it's basically the same thing. You're putting them in a position where their feet are lower than their hips.
Yeah.
So even just lifting halfway up, so they're going from 45 degrees to 30 degrees or 20 degrees. They're not even going into extension yet, really. They're just bringing their leg up towards, neutral, really. That could be huge. And it can, again, begin to get those glutes engaged, begin to really feel, and at the same time, isolate the core, get the core to really feel what it feels like to support them while doing that, because really that's the goal.
Yep. Hold the low back steady, hold the pelvis steady, allow the hips to move without necessarily moving everything up above that.
Yeah.
So guys, this is real. This is kind of a massive amount of specialized stabilization. Right? Like this isn't looking for what we think of as a normal gait pattern necessarily, right? Of like hip extension, that hip rotates forward, hip flexion, that hip rotates back, right? This is often looking for really keeping that pelvis literally not moving much. And sometimes, again, with low back clients, you're often going for pain relief over optimum biomechanics, just to be blunt.
100%.
Right. And especially with stenosis, it's like, I'm going to do whatever I can, as wacky as it may seem from a ideal movement perspective, to get that client pain free, or at least minimize the discomfort. And then hopefully they can build some more strength from there. And, maybe over time we can get towards a more neutral gait pattern or not. Again, I've got clients where they're not going to get there. They're just, I know they're not, just because of their pain level, but I know that we can do enough to keep them more comfortable. And that's really important.
And something to keep in mind is, I know we have sort of a feeling in our brain that we want everybody to look symmetrical, balanced, to have muscular balance left to right, to have symmetry, to look perfect when they're moving. That if they go into something, it looks great and graceful. And that's a wonderful goal. However, not everybody's going to fall into that category. And the older we get, the less likely we are to fall into that category, at least at the beginning. Now's a perfect time of year to think about this, because if you're getting a client for the first time and they haven't exercised in years, they're not going to know what their body is doing in space. They have no clue.
Absolutely. No.
And do you think they're balanced? Probably not. Do you think they have some asymmetries? Absolutely.
Undoubtedly.
And when you add pain on top of that, or medical conditions on top of that, that can lead to other things. Because let's face it, our bodies will do anything to seek pleasure and avoid pain, right? That's
Right.
sort of,
And to get the job done. I want
and
to
to
add
get
that in
job
that
done.
too. Right.
Absolutely. And to, very goal oriented. So for us, if I know that if I lean a certain way and twist a certain way, I don't have pain. Well, guess what? If my body figures that out, I can avoid pain. They may have been that way for 5 or 7 years, 10 years.
Right.
And then
Exactly.
they come to us. And if we try and unwind that,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that can be the opposite of what they need. Not always, but sometimes it can be. So you really have to take a look at the client in front of you and figure out, okay, what's in their best interest? And if you're trying to unwind that and they suddenly start getting worse, maybe there's something else here that is protecting them. I have a great example
Compensation.
of this.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my clients, she came in and she hadn't seen the doctor yet about a back problem. And it was a pretty severe back issue. Just wasn't sure what it was. And everything that we were doing wasn't really helping much. And it wasn't hurting her anymore, but it really wasn't helping. And it was one of those things I kept ticking off the box. I said, something else is here. Something else is going on because this hip, you can't get the glutes engaged on that right side. That hip is elevated chronically. It will not drop down. That glute med is pretty much gone. It's not firing whatsoever. When you walk, you sling out on that side. And no matter what I was doing to help correct that, every time I corrected it, made her back problem worse.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So I was like, okay, there's a reason for it doing that then.
Yep.
There's gotta be. So eventually she did go into the doctor and eventually we found out she had some spondylolisthesis, some facet joint issues and stenosis, lateral stenosis on that side. So I was like, okay. So over the years, she literally had adjusted her body to decompress that area as much as she could. She also had a herniation from the past that they saw there, but it wasn't affecting it. So I said, chances are that hiking of the hip took pressure off of that disc, but then all the other things took place over the years. So now everything is sort of getting crunchy in that area. Very technical term, I know, crunchy, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And things are now compressing. And now, okay, we need to attack this from a very different way and different angle. And a lot of it was just positioning, trying to find the right position, trying to find this, trying to find that, and trying to get those muscles engaged in a way that wouldn't set her off. And it's taken us years to sort of figure out what she needs. The doctor said, there's no way you'll be out of pain unless you have surgery. Well, we got her out of pain within about 6 months. And the pain would come and go. She finally found a great physical therapist that we worked together on it. And she's done incredibly well. It's really come a long way. But it's been a fight. It's been a fight with her body, and there's not much we could do about it. It's just constant. But finding the right position and finding what works for her really is what it took.
And this is just so typical. And the thing again, like I'm moving in this direction. This is really where you have to listen to the body in front of you. Because again, to Brian's point, I think there's a lot of really illustrative things about that story you just told. One of them is compensations are often there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right. Clients often have something odd happening, not just because they've decided to be eccentric and rotate to the right, but because it is, either it's a functional thing, like they're a tennis player or something and they're right-handed. So there can be functional things that train that particular pattern, or there's a pain avoidance scenario, or there's a structural, imbalance. So all those things are just useful to pay attention to. And what I really find is most useful now as a kind of mature teacher in terms of my mindset is not so much how can I get this body to look like it should, but how can I get this body to work as best as it can, which are really two different questions, right?
And I love
with stenosis, man, it is really like, okay, this breaks all the rules of good posture, and that's what gives you pain relief. So we're going to train you to look like an old man shuffling. I mean, to be right? Or we're going to train you to kind of walk with your feet in front of you, your pelvis tucked under, and a little bit of a posterior tilt the whole time. That's what we're going to do. And okay, now let's see. Now you can do a block. Now you can do 2 blocks. Now you can go for a mile. That's great because that means you're getting circulation and all these other things, and you can function, but you're not in pain.
Yep. And for those clients, a lot of times, if you can get them into a position that has less pain, you may be able to decrease the amount of severe positioning
over time. Exactly.
And I tell people this all the time. It's not my goal to do that. I'm not trying to say, okay, in 6 months, we're going to try this. No. But over time, I might say, oh, you're feeling a little bit more comfortable in this position. Okay, you seem to be able to handle a little bit more of an upright posture. This is good. Am I going to test it? No. But they can possibly get a little closer to traditional neutral. Great. But it's not necessarily a goal. They may get there, they may not. But it's something that I've noticed in clients that as their body gets stronger, and as they can sort of elongate and stand with a slight tilt in their pelvis, but still remain thoracically extended, because again, we are talking about the whole spine here. Oh my gosh, they're standing up taller. They're looking better. And they'll say, my posture seems to be getting better. I said, great. But you see, they know how to protect their low back because we've taught them that. So they're in a slight posterior tilt. So they give them as much as they need without going overboard. And they get comfortable with that.
Yeah, and the other thing too that I'm reminded of this because one of my teachers, Diana Harold, who was an early teacher of mine, is wonderful. Like she was the best person I've ever seen at very gently pushing people towards better. So in other words, if somebody had an issue like the client you just talked about, you kind of do whatever you can to get them comfortable, right? Whatever that is. It's kind of some wacky things. But she would, again, just paying attention. Can they take a little bit more of what used to cause them trouble? Can you add a little weight? Can you change the pelvic position? Can you add a little more load to the upper body? Can you have them start to work overhead, right? Like all those things, like in that sense, it's like compensate when you need to. But the second thing is don't give up.
Yep.
Don't assume that that's how it's always going to be. One other thing I wanted to mention there is I'm thinking about your client a little bit. And many clients that I've had have had disc issues as a 30, 40, 50 person, right? As a younger person, if you will. Then they get into and they've compensated and learned how to manage that. So they have a lumbar roll, they keep their car seat in a certain position. They maybe have a little bit of a wedge on their seat. So they're always in a little bit of extension. Then that's pretty much managed. They really haven't had disc problems in years, but that's how they're managing it. And suddenly their back starts to hurt, right? And now, oh no, now all those things that I was doing for the disc problem, I now have stenosis or spondylolisthesis or something else. And none of those strategies which were working are the right ones.
And that's a huge issue.
That's really tricky, man.
And it's hard for us as movement professionals and people who specialize in what we do in rehabilitation and working with people who have pain issues to be able to say, yes, what you've been doing for the last 20 years to keep you out of pain was wonderful 20 years ago.
Yes.
However, you need something different now. It's
right,
hard
especially
to
the
change
opposite of what you used to do. Like all your go-tos for pain control are like the wrong thing. Like that guy standing up and going into extension. Like that could have come from who knows what, right?
Exactly.
But it's like no longer appropriate.
Right. And that's the whole thing, is trying to get them to change their mindset can be a challenge because you're telling them what has worked is wrong. Right. And yet their mind is saying that, but it's helped me. No. It's always worked. I said, well, it's always worked until now.
Yeah.
And your body's different. And sometimes you got to sneak up on that. You can't just sort of beat them over the head with it because, as we all know, people get very defensive. And sometimes you've got to be able to sneak it in and say, you seem to be doing a little better with a flatter back rather than an arch. I wonder if you've just, your body has evolved into wanting this position, or maybe you've graduated out of that position toward this one. There's language we can use to
Yeah.
make them feel not like they're regressing, but it's changed. It's gotten, it's that solved your problem before, but I think your body's evolved now.
Exactly. Make it a positive.
Make it a positive, even though technically it's really not, but
Right.
sometimes we have to change their mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
There's
And
something
I
that I
think,
wanted to
yeah,
mention before I
please.
forget, because,
Yes.
it just sort of popped into my head. With some clients, when we're talking about positions, I'm going to talk about foot positioning here in a standing position. Okay, because that one client that I was telling you about, that it was on the right side, she had some central stenosis, but her right side was much more problematic than her left. What I actually found was, in a standing position, instead of having her feet together, just taking that right foot, because it was her right side, forward, put that right side into slight flexion, because again, her pelvis suddenly, one side is a little more flexed, the other's a little more extended, to do anything from triceps to rows, to you name it. Anytime we were doing a standing position, a press, whatever, I would do that. And every time she said, this feels so much better, she'd switch legs, because again, we want to be balanced. So she'll switch sides and nope, it doesn't feel good. It hurts. So guess what? Everything we've done is with that right foot forward. And it seems counterintuitive because we want symmetry. However, for her, that really works. And we're still able to train the other side. And sometimes I bring her foot a little closer, sometimes a little farther, but we try and find the right position. So play with that as well. The side that there might be numbness, tingling, radiating pain down, if it is more from a stenosis or a bony issue, try standing with that foot forward and see if that could take pressure off of that, because I found a lot of success with that.
That's so funny that you mentioned that, because I've been playing with that a lot with a couple of different clients.
Have you?
Yeah, and honestly with myself as well, because I've got a leg length difference and other kinds of things, which just mean my pelvis is never quite even. And it's so funny because I was using it in a client where it was a sacroiliac joint issue. Right.
Yeah.
Which is, again, similar kind of related deal, where just some part of that pelvis is just wacky. And it's better if it is in her case, in slight extension or a slight anterior tilt on that side, because it compresses the SI joint in a particular way for her. So that foot goes back, or that foot goes forward. And she's a Pilates teacher, right? So I'm like, okay, well, see if this feels better. Try standing that way when you're teaching.
Yep.
Or, I think of another client who was actually an elementary school teacher, right? So she is standing up pretty much all day, running around, dealing with kids. And I said the same thing. I was like, well, try just when you're standing and teaching, just play with that foot position. And she's like, oh my God, I feel so much better by the end of the day. So, again, it's not standing on both feet, even like we're supposed to, but it's finding what really works for that particular structure.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah,
especially if you're
cool.
putting force through it.
Exactly. Standing,
because if
walking,
I have them,
whatever.
Yeah. Or, during an exercise, whether you're using bands, cables, springs, whatever, when you're trying to load something, everything suddenly gets tense and taut. All the muscles respond. I like to do things unilaterally because I want to create, balance. And I like to do things, in a standing position because it gets your core involved a lot more. But what I find for those clients, by finding that position that works for them with the foot forward, it really made a huge difference. And they could still get their core involved. They could still really get their body working the way that they want. But more importantly, I've asked them 3 months down the road, when you're standing at home doing the dishes, do you do it with one foot? Yeah, I do. It's become a habit, a positive habit, to take pressure off for them.
Yep.
That they've really adopted it into their daily activities. Like you said, for a school teacher.
Yeah.
A lot of people would want to put a wedge in their shoe or something like that to try and correct leg length or pelvic, obliquity. And that can make a huge difference. But also just by changing that foot position, because that's beyond our scope of practice. Let's face it, that's for a physical therapist or an occupational therapist or a doctor. But just by changing their foot position, if we can get their pelvis to sort of realign, and that one side that's angry, to put that into a slight posterior, tilt, to open that up, slight flexion in that part of the spine. Again, we're talking millimeters sometimes make a difference.
Yeah. I sometimes I think of just like either half foot, like I'm just a half a foot taller. Sometimes only like toes taller.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like my big toe joint is level with the big toe on my other side, something like that.
Yep.
So it varies, and whatever works there. One thing that I played with, started to play with, really, I should say, because this is in the experimental phase, everybody out there. So you can experiment with me, but no, it's an experiment.
Yep.
Is on the reformer on footwork, doing a bias so that I'm on the ball of the foot on one foot and I'm on the heel on the other foot, and I'm bending and straightening. It's a little weird. It's a little wacky. And you kind of have to really pay attention to where the pelvis is, because it is weird doing that in a supine position just because of how the low back is and how the pelvis is and whatever. But it's been interesting to play with that and to actually work the legs asymmetrically as well. Or in feet and straps on the trap table, to basically do bending and straightening. So just like you would do a plie that's open chain-ish or semi-open chain or whatever, unstable open chain. I don't know what you're talking about. A lot of ways, no good language about that, but you understand what I'm talking about. And I'll have one foot going up and one foot going down, right? So that one leg is in more flexion, or one hip is more extension, and one hip's in more flexion.
How does that feel? Besides wacky? Because we all know
honestly, it feels really good. And sometimes it's a really nice way to identify which one feels better. Because again, often with a sacroiliac issue or a low back issue or even a hip issue, they'll go, oh, like this feels really great. And this feels like, oh, like they can feel the tension in the hip or in the low back or something. So oftentimes it just helps to identify where they might want to focus in terms of postural support, at least for the time being.
Would you ever, on the reformer, possibly slightly lengthen that one side that you want?
All the time.
That's what I'm wondering. I was just thinking, because
I do it all the time.
I know clients, they end up twisted a little bit and they say, it's not even. And I've done that before. And I've said, but keep it straight and see if that one leg being a little bit longer might just change, and we're talking about, like half an inch. We're not talking much, it's a fraction. But they feel it. But I do find that can make a difference. They can feel a difference.
I do it all the time, especially for clients for two things. One, either when there really is a scoliosis or a high hip or a leg length difference or anything where there really is kind of a structural wackiness going on. I also do it though in a situation where there is not any structural imbalance, but let's say like the classic one is a client who had ACL reconstruction. So that leg is way weaker than the other leg. And maybe it was their non-dominant leg anyway. So when they go to feet and straps on the reformer, different on the trap table, but on the reformer, because it tends to, balance out basically, all the work's happening from the other leg. Like the leg that was surgered, nothing's happening there. And you'll see it, like it's like almost like that strap will go a little bit slack if they're doing something like little circles or something. So sometimes I'll just give a little pull on that rope just so they can feel the weaker side or the less dominant side getting enjoying part of the picture. And participating. So again, I don't do it a lot, but even just a little bit, like, oh, now I can feel my right leg. And sometimes that'll make a difference too for somebody who's really, again, just imbalanced because of muscular stuff or a surgery or something.
And that's interesting for me to think about, because not only when I work with people on the reformer or the trap table, but also on a suspension trainer.
Yeah.
Because the arms will you can shift it because it's sort of over the top, actually shifts one side to the other, like an A.
Right.
That you can literally change that, and you can see, especially if I'm doing their lower body and their feet are sort of in those straps, one side will take over from the other, and it's very easy to see there. But that would be interesting to just change that a little bit, shorten one side up, and see if that makes a difference. I hadn't thought about that, but when you said that, I said that might be an interesting thing to play with a little bit, at least with my own body, and see how that feels.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have a leg length difference, which I've been working with forever. And so, for example, on the Bodhi, where you do have the ability to adjust
Hmm.
the ropes, I would always shorten up my short leg one, because otherwise, when I stood in it, I would always pull to my longer leg. And you could see my weight just shift over to my longer leg, because that's where I always put my weight. And instead, to get the weight into that shorter side, I had to actually, shorten that strap a little bit. The same thing's true with feet
Interesting.
and straps. But
Yeah.
I've got to shorten
Huh.
up that shorter side a little bit.
Yeah. So those of you listening, you can see that a lot of this is going to be playing. You've got
Yeah.
to figure out what works for you in these situations, because every client in front of you is different. There is no, when I first got into the business and was starting to work with people in rehabilitation, what was what they tried to teach me was everybody follows this flow chart. If this, then that. If that, then
Right.
this.
Yep.
And that might work for the first step, maybe the second. But after that, everybody's individual and it didn't work. You threw the flow chart away and it's kind of like, okay, the person in front of me, if they only have one thing wrong with them, maybe that would work. But let's face it, we are all individuals. We all have a multitude of things that has happened to us to bring us to where we are today through either activity or inactivity. And both can lead to different things when it comes to muscular balances and imbalances, balance, imbalance. So you really have to take that person in front of you as their unique case. And I think that's very important to keep that in mind.
It's, I mean, that's why we have this podcast, really, Brian, don't you think?
Yeah.
That's kind of our raison d'etre for moving conversations. Because, so much of it is, I think about starting at St. Francis, I'm sure, similar for you. And, I think about like my first client, or something about my first client. I think I had these two young students from San Francisco Ballet's, 6th year, their kind of final year in school. And one had a stress fracture on her tibia, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, one just didn't have a very good turnout or something like that, right? So you just start like, okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
I need to get this stronger. And you just start and you figure something out and you do the thing you're supposed to do. Because there are these little flow charts,
Mm-hmm.
disc injury extension, stenosis, flexion. Okay, maybe they've got both, and then you've got to figure out what works,
What
right?
works best?
What works best that day. And it's just, you start out with the guidelines, and then
Mm-hmm.
if you really pay attention and you work deeper and deeper into that body in front of you, that's when you start to break the rules, right? And you
Yeah.
start to break the ideals, and you start to go for, what does that body really need? How can I customize this in the best possible way, right, for that client in front of me to get the best possible effect from what we're doing here
Mm-hmm.
today?
Yeah. And I love what you said, that what affects it today? Because let's
Yeah.
face it, even with stenosis, sometimes it didn't work right. You'd put them in the
Yep.
same position that you've done the last 6 weeks. Everything's
Nothing.
been
And they're
working in the
like,
right
ow,
way.
it all hurts.
Yeah. And then today
Yeah.
it hurts.
Yeah.
And of course, they want to blame us. It's kind of like, well, it's been working. So you
Right.
really have
I didn't
to,
do anything different.
right. And I will say this, be willing 100% to take what you've programmed and written out very carefully and crumple it up and throw it away. And just say, okay, now we're going to deal with this. I've used this example all the time. One of my best friends, she was my bookkeeper. She was my concierge in business. She would come in and I would work with her and I would have the perfect workout planned, man. I mean, I'm like, I'm going to kick her butt. She's going to love this. She'd come in and say, oh, this happened or that happened. And I'm literally going, yep, crumple that up, throw that away, because today is completely different. And no matter what they have on their regularly scheduled programming, of stenosis or
Right.
whatever,
Yeah.
there's going to be something that sometimes happens. They were raking leaves. They were shoveling snow. They slept funny. They sneezed in bed. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just saying all the things that I've
Anything
thrown
can
my
happen.
back out doing, like,
Yes.
really, that's what did it? But yeah, that's kind of you just have to deal with what's in front of you,
Mhm.
you know?
And one of the things I find, I think there's a little bit of a theme here today, but one of the things I find, for all of us, I would say all of us in the personal training slash Pilates world, is we have ideals in our mind, right? Perfect muscular
Mhm.
balance, perfect mobility, like whatever it is, perfect integration, whatever it is, all the things we have in our mind, perfect posture. And what's interesting to me about, especially working in Pilates, is how often I've had to really throw out those ideals for the good of the client in front of me. You know,
Mhm.
what I think should be happening, oh, I think they should do blah, 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 blah. Like you said, the perfect program
Yep.
you've got in your head or that you've written down or you know is there. And you're looking at the client and go, none of that is going to work for you today. Right.
Yep.
So let's, and, you know, and in Pilates, one of the key things, and this is controversial, but I'll say it anyway, is there's so much flexion in Pilates. There's so much emphasis on articulated lumbar flexion, which can be
Yes.
quite wonderful and quite useful. But again, when I've got a client with, you know, osteoporosis, or I've got a client with a disc problem, I'm like, I can't do those exercises. They're not appropriate for you. Or clients in
Right.
a certain phase of pregnancy, those clients are, you know, they can't fold because there's a baby in front of them. And so it's also just that understanding of, you know, you don't throw out the goal of a good functioning, pain-free, comfortable body, but you have to adapt the ways you get to it.
Love that term, adapt. We have to be a we have to take an adaptive approach to everybody in front of us and be willing to be flexible with that. Because I'm sure you've seen, I've taught a number of instructors who they have their choreography and they're
Yes.
going to do that choreography on that client in front of them, whether it's appropriate or not.
Yeah, exactly.
And really, that's one thing that we have to focus on is what's appropriate for this client in front of us.
Right.
And we know that for stenosis, we want to have more of a flexed posture most of the time.
Exactly. Exactly.
Most of the time, that's going to feel good. But again, we have to figure out what's right for that client at that moment. And when we can do that, we can get them better, in my opinion, faster.
Right. And it's like coming back to stenosis clients, since we've taken a little loop here
Yeah.
in terms of philosophy. Coming back to that, it's like some of it too is finding, and I think you've said this, but just to bring it out, how much flexion is best for them.
Yeah.
Is it a little bit? Is it a lot? It's not. And I also want to say here that the challenge with flexion for a lot of people is it becomes a slump. It becomes
Mhm.
unsupported flexion.
Yes.
And that's not what I'm looking for. Like, I don't want them just to kind of, you know, hang out in their chair and let their low back push into the chair. I want them, even if they're slightly flexed, to still having that support and that decompression, if you will. So a little
Yep.
more muscular engagement, not just a slump. And I think that's a good fine point when working with stenosis clients, because yes, you want flexion, but it isn't just collapse.
Well, I love that you brought that up because I was literally heading in that direction when you mentioned the osteoporotic client. Because we want flexion, but we want flexion in the right place. We really
Right.
want it to be in the lumbar spine and not necessarily putting them into a greater kyphosis, which slumping is. Slumping is basically taking our normal, you know, S curves and making it one giant C, which
Right. Yeah.
isn't beneficial for everybody.
Yeah.
So sometimes it is like this client that I was referring to earlier, just opening up that area a little bit of a posterior tilt is all this client needed. They didn't need a severe tuck under with a rounded shoulders or something. They just needed
Right.
a little bit.
Yeah.
So finding out what that client needs and how much, and then really training them around that and reminding them of that. So when you get them in position, you can just say, my cue a lot of times is, you know, keep your spine still, keep it stable
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
with, or where's your spine? So that they think, oh, yeah, or where's your lumbar? Oh, yeah. And they tuck under that little bit. And we've got eagle eyes that as instructors, we should be able to say, that's too much. You're starting to go too far there.
Back off. Right.
Yeah, you're starting to go a little far there.
Your tailbone is up in the air.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. We've all seen that. But yeah, to try and get them to feel it. And for me, years ago, I was told this, and it's something that I fought with until I understood the reasoning why. Is someone once told me, you want to get the client so that they don't need you. You want to get them so that they take responsibility of the actions themselves.
Absolutely.
And my thought, being a newbie, I was like, no, 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 I want them to need me. I want them to keep paying me. I want the business and everything. But the longer I started going, it's like, no, I want to teach them how to be healthier and happier and actually take this and be responsible for themselves, because then they're going to get better faster. And then I can do more when they are in front of me. So it's always been a goal.
Well, graduate. Have your clients graduate. Like, I'm sure you have this too. Like, how many of your clients get back to you and say, your voice is always in my head. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. Like whatever those little cues are that seem to really help for them. And they're just,
20 years later.
Every time they do something, they've got your voice in their head going, da, 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 da. Exactly.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we've come to the end of our hour.
Yeah. And I think we gave a lot of helpful hints. And look, let's face it. A lot of times when we're making these discussions and we're talking about this, sometimes more questions come up than specific answers. Mm-hmm. We've pointed you in the right direction on how to get a client in the right position and how to work with them. And yes, you're going to still have questions. And some of that is going to be, you're going to have to figure out what works for that client on this day and work around that. And hopefully we've pointed you in the right direction and pushed you toward that ultimate goal of understanding what to do for every client with stenosis. But understand, every client is different that comes to you. So hopefully we've answered some questions and didn't just create, 50 more.
And if we did, just feel free to contact us. Yeah.
Exactly. So do us a favor, hit the like and subscribe. We really appreciate it. You can always contact us through email. movingconvos@gmail.com is the easiest way. You can also get in touch with us on Instagram. Moving Convos on Instagram is the place that we're probably most active. So those are the two places. Like, subscribe, comment, all of those things. It really helps us out. We really appreciate it. And we really appreciate all of you for listening today. Thank you very much. And for Nora St. John and Brian Ritchie, we'll see y'all next week.
Bye, guys.